Hey, welcome back. And if you're new here, my name is Christina Kent, and I'm an artist based out of San Francisco. And today I'm going to be doing a portrait painting, but I'm going to be stepping a little bit outside of my comfort zone. So oftentimes when I do portrait paintings, I paint using naturalistic colors, and I usually paint from my own color reference photos. But for this one, I'm going to be painting from an old photograph from one of my grandparents' photo albums. So this is an old black and white photo. And then I'm going to be not only inventing the color, but I'm going to be inventing it using slightly unnatural colors, colors that you wouldn't really see in real life. And I was inspired to do this because I recently took a workshop with Amy Dury, who uses a lot of sort of unnatural, interesting colors in her figurative paintings. And also I've been inspired by the works of Anthony Cudahy, who does a lot of figurative work that uses these invented unnatural colors. So if you haven't seen these painters, I'll link their info in the description, but that's kind of what was inspiring me to go out of my comfort zone and try something a little bit different. Now I'm starting this portrait with a sort of cadmium scarlet or cadmium red light base, sort of vermilion, a very bright orangey red, and that's going to be sort of the base color for the skin tone. This is a photo, it's based on a photo that looks like it was taken on a really bright and sunny day. And usually on bright days, shadows can be really luminous and bright as well, not just the parts that are in light, but even the shadows can seem really bright. So I'm sort of playing with this concept, but taking it to an even more extreme level by using this just really saturated red. And then I am accenting some of the shadows, or I'm modeling the form a bit by bringing in this deeper brown into some of the shadows and the dark areas of the figure's hair. But I really want that red, this super bright red, to stand out. Now, this is also really tricky for me because if you want to get a red like this to feel very, very bright, I feel like the best way to do it is to put it in sort of a thin layer and then allow some of the brightness of the canvas or the surface behind it to sort of shine through. And this can give the paint almost a glow to it. It works, I think, even better if the canvas is totally white, then you really get that brightness of the canvas. My canvas here, or my panel that I'm working on, is toned a little gold color, but I hope you can see there's still sort of the glow of that gold coming through below the red. The tricky part with this is it means that I can't really sort of make mistakes with the red or correct it. And if I put an opaque color over it, I can't really fix that other than what you might be seeing here a little bit. I can get a paper towel and put some solvent on it and rub away some of the paint to bring it back that glow a little bit, but it's definitely less forgiving than my usual style of painting, which involves a lot of layering. It's almost a little bit like, I feel like it's a bit akin to like watercolor painting, where once you put it down, like if you put a pure color down, you can't make it any more pure than that. And if you mix other colors with it, it's going to start like dulling it down a little bit. So that was a little bit tricky for me, but I decided I would give it a try. And then as I'm laying in the lights, I'm just going to be really careful to make sure I only put the lights where I really want them to be, because I know if I put some light paint in the shadow area and then I try to bring back that shadow, I'm never going to get back that pure glow in the shadow. So I'm being a lot more careful with the lights. And then here, as I'm adding in these lights, I want to create this feeling of strong sunlight, even though the colors are kind of strange. So I'm making the light I'm using a lot of like Naples yellow, white, yellow, creating this really bright, light, yellowy color. It's less, I think you could say it's kind of like less saturated, like it's not as punchy as the red of the shadows. So there's an interesting contrast, I think, going on between the highlight and the shadow, but you are getting that super strong sense of light. And this is, like I said, pretty different from how I would usually paint, where I'm generally covering the canvas or most of the canvas in pretty thick paint. But here I'm keeping most of the thick paint for a lot of the highlighted areas, and the shadows are relatively thinner. Now she's wearing a white shirt here, so the shadow of the shirt I am going to paint pretty opaque, and I'm using this kind of periwinkle blue color that I think it contrasts pretty nicely with the reddish brown of her skin in shadow, and also it goes nicely with the sort of Naples yellowy color of the parts of her and her shirt and highlight. But then for her face and for her hair, I'm keeping the shadow parts pretty thin, pretty light. As I'm painting in her shirt, I'm trying to just keep things really simple. This is a pretty small portrait, and I want to just focus on the larger shapes that are happening in the image. And then especially for things like clothing, like I want most of the attention to be going to the expression on her face and just these beautiful highlights that we're seeing across her face. So I'm keeping the clothing pretty simple, just as kind of like a supporting character in this painting. And then also, as I was painting in the clothing, I have that sort of outline of her shoulders that is in this bright kind of vermilion color. And I was kind of deciding whether or not I wanted to cover that up or keep it. But as I was painting, I decided I liked that sort of almost like graphic or illustrative effect of that line, those lines on her shoulder. So I decided I wanted to keep it in. I think it creates like an interesting accent. And I have been interested in using more drawing lines in my painting, or using more line in general. So I thought I would sort of play with that a little bit in this portrait and just see how it looked. I think it works well here. And it creates a nice, like, I think that line, it almost has like, it almost starts to vibrate when it's next to that blue color and then contrasted against the yellow. So I think it really like catches the eye and sort of helps to lead you to the expression on her face. For the background, I'm also keeping it pretty simplified. In the photo, it was kind of blurry what was going on behind her. And so I'm sort of making things up. I'm looking at the general shapes that were in the background, but I'm also kind of just thinking about the overall design of the painting. And I liked the idea of having one side, the background's a little bit darker behind her shoulders, so the blue kind of contrasts against the yellow of her shoulder, and then the part of her that, like the part of her shoulder on, I guess, the right side that's in shadow, I like the idea of contrasting that with a lighter background. So I'm sort of playing around with the colors and shapes of the background to suggest these things that are behind her, but also to support the overall design of the painting. So I think this painting ended up being a departure from my usual style in a lot of ways. First, using this thinner paint in the shadows and really taking advantage of that glow of the canvas underneath, but also inventing the colors and using colors that we wouldn't usually see when looking at a portrait, and then also inventing some of the things in the background, which I think the background, it does have more of a kind of ambiguous design feel to it. Like, to me, it doesn't look necessarily like a believable space that she's in, which is different from what I would usually paint. But I think it is an interesting background, and it does complement well the overall design of the painting. So yeah, so here I just kind of am playing around with some of those shapes in the background and trying to find the right balance between suggesting what's there and also creating something interesting that doesn't draw the eye away too much from the painting. Then I go in and I add some more, like I build up those highlights a little bit more. I really want to create that sense of very strong light hitting her face. But at the same time, I also am trying to not create too many details that would distract from the overall shapes in this painting. So as usual, I'm trying to be restrained with my highlights and put just what I feel like is necessary to suggest that feeling of strong light. At this point, I also take a picture of the painting and I reverse it so that I can get a sense of how things are looking, which honestly I should have done earlier on in the process, but I was like so into the painting that I didn't do it. And when I did that, I realized that her face was a little bit too wide. So then I go in and I'm fixing sort of that drawing issue, trying to make it look a little bit leaner, a little bit more like what I was seeing in the picture. which, yeah, like I said, better to do that earlier on in the process before you get super far. As you can see here, I have to redo a lot of the work that I'd been doing, or a lot of the work that I'd put down earlier. So that's a little bit frustrating, but thankfully the background wasn't too complicated, so it was easy to make this little adjustment and yeah, make the painting look a little bit more accurate. And as I'm going in, I'm trying to make her face a little bit narrower, but I also don't want to go too far and mix some of that like lighter paint into the shadow side of her face. I don't want to, like I said, to disrupt that glow. So I have to be really careful in this process. I also noticed that the shadow on her forehead was a little bit stronger in the photo, so I wanted to increase that to create that sense of depth. And then at this point, once I've fixed the drawing issues with her face and repainted part of the background, then it's more just getting into some of the smaller details. I add a bit more shadows to create that sense of form, and make the contrast between the light and shadow part a little bit stronger. Still being really careful to make sure I let a lot of that red, like that bright red, shine through. I don't want to lose that, so I try to use just a small amount of the shadows. And then in some parts where I think the shadow was a little bit too much, then I take my paper towel and I can rub some of that away to bring back a little bit more of that bright orange. I also use the paper towel and some Gamsol to take some of the shadow away. But I notice even when I do that, I still am not getting that super bright, pure, orangey red color back. So it is a little bit duller when I do that. But I still think it creates like a really nice effect. So yeah, it's just going in and fixing some of the details around her face, really trying to get that sort of skeptical expression right that she has in her eyes. And so just refining some of those small details around the eyebrows, around the eyes to capture that. And at this point, I'm pretty much done with the painting. Overall, I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think it was a great exercise. It was a huge challenge for me to not only paint from a black and white photograph and make it a color photograph, but also taking that black and white photo and then using colors that I wouldn't usually see in nature. So for me, that was just a really great exercise, a really great challenge, and I think it's something that I will definitely do again. I think observing colors in nature and painting in naturalistic colors is a fantastic exercise, and I think we learn so much from doing that. But at the same time, when we can expand our color palette and when we can invent things in our paintings and kind of move beyond that reference image that we're looking at, or whether it's a photo or whether it's just looking at nature, then I think it does open up a whole new realm of creative expression and possibility. So yeah, so I hope you liked this video and that it gave you some inspiration for how you could push out of your comfort zone in your own work. This is definitely something that I want to keep trying with my own work. But yeah, let me know if you liked this video, what you thought of it in the comments, if it gave you some new ideas, and yeah, I'd just love to hear your feedback. As always, a huge shout out to my supporters on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for supporting this channel and for making these videos happen. If you like my art, if you like my videos, and you want to help me make more, check out my Patreon at the link. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.